All right, we are a couple minutes past 3 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to Accelerate Your City Advancing Fleet Electrification. My name is Jennifer Fenning. I'm the Director of Communications for Smart Columbus, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is the first in a three-part series hosted by Smart Columbus and the Electrification Coalition, and the series is designed to share the lessons learned from the 3-year Smart Columbus Electrification Program, which was funded by a $10 million grant awarded to Columbus by the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation as the winner of the U.S. Department of Transportation's Smart City Challenge. Implementation of this grant came to a close in March of this year, and in May we launched accelerateyourcity.com. This site is designed to serve as a digital capstone of the grant program, where we share our approach and the lessons learned so that other cities can benefit from the journey that we have been on to increase EV adoption in the Columbus region. We invite you to visit Accelerate Your City to learn more about the electrification work within the grant scope. But today in particular, we're going to focus on fleet electrification. Joining us are Ben Prohaska of the Electrification Coalition, and Bud Broughton and John King of the City of Columbus, and each of them played a role in helping us pursue our electrification goals. So they'll go all the way back to the Smart City Challenge, and to do that, I will toss things over to Ben with the Electrification Coalition.
Great, well, thank you, Jennifer, and excited to be here and have a conversation about sort of where we've gotten to and where we started. So, are you pulling up the slide deck? Sorry.
Yep, it's advancing for you.
Ah, I'm just not seeing it yet. So pardon me for my own technical issues. All right, there we go. Apologies. So great to connect. Just to give some background for those who aren't aware, aren't connected, the Electrification Coalition is a national organization that works to accelerate the adoption of plug-in electric vehicles. We're a little different than maybe some organizations focusing on it because our sort of agenda and focus is around national security and economic security, and the idea that our oil dependence puts us at great economic and national security risk. And so it's just a key issue around the way that you can think about transportation electrification solving a myriad of problems. So just for background, right now, 92% of the transportation sector is entirely reliant on oil to get from point A to point B. And that center sort of graph, which is pretty hard to read from here, but gives you a sense, all those sort of squiggly lines all over the place are basically all of the different alternative fuel types. And then the one that has the arrow pointing to it at the bottom that looks much more static is electricity costs over time. And so a big part of transportation electrification is the idea that it actually helps stabilize prices. And so, even right now, when we're thinking about a time of COVID and cities and states are struggling with how do they generate revenue or meet the demands that COVID's presenting, the idea that we can actually have much greater certainty about the operational costs of our fleets, can really make things much easier for cities and states to plan and think about how to make their transportation future something they can manage. The other part is just the idea that electrification reduces emissions, and there's lots of different ways that you can look at this, but one of my favorite lines on this front is that an EV or an electric vehicle is the only vehicle on the road that can get cleaner over time. Because our grid is cleaning up, we're introducing more renewables, we're taking some of the dirtiest sources offline, and so every mile I drive of my EV has the potential to get cleaner over time, and that is not something that a gas car can do. Next slide. So how do we get into this? We actually entered into an agreement, a partnership with Vulcan as the philanthropic partner. And for some quick history, the Electrification Coalition did one of the first accelerator communities called Drive Electric Northern Colorado, which you can find on the internet. And we worked with the communities of Loveland and Fort Collins as a first sort of all ecosystem, EV ecosystem effort. Through that, we did a lot of on-the-ground learning, direct implementation, and as Vulcan or Paul G. Allen Philanthropies now was looking for a partner to engage in transportation electrification, we were very lucky to work with them, and they ultimately agreed to bring us on to help them think through and support the Smart City Challenge. The partnership rapidly grew and included working with the U.S. Department of Transportation as a national government partner. And so out of that, it engaged way more interest than we ever thought. In fact, when we were working with Mark Dowd, who was the Undersecretary at the time, we thought maybe we would get 20 or 30 responses because the timeline was incredibly accelerated. And there were a lot of things about the process that we just thought it was going to be hard for cities to jump in and really put in their best effort. We were amazed at the response. And in fact, in this case, this is a little outdated. In fact, 78 cities ended up competing for the Smart City Challenge all across the country. And one of the amazing things about this is that cities, in many ways, it accelerated their planning and their timeline and their engagement around transportation electrification. That was really exciting to see. From those 78 applicants, there were 7 finalists selected. And so after working with the 7 finalists to sort of refine their proposals, at the end of the day, Smart Columbus, or Columbus, Ohio, was the eventual winner. And so for the past 4 years, we've been working with this team. And I think in general, there's a lot of times when people talk about EVs existing on the coasts, and it was a really important opportunity to work with a leading city on this issue and help bring EVs to the center of the country. And as we get into this more, and I think Bud and John will talk about, I think you'll be hard put to find a community at this point that has gone from almost zero work on electrification to now a international leading city on transportation electrification. And so it's really exciting to see the end results of the program. And the idea that the city and the partnership has hit so many goals, but also the idea of the amazing capacity that's been developed in Columbus that I think they can share with others across the country and others across the globe. So I think on to the next part.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And thanks for the opportunity, everyone, to share the efforts by the City of Columbus to replace internal combustion engines with electric vehicles. Just kind of going on from what Ben said there, I've worked over 40 years now in the transportation industry. I'm an electrical engineer, and basically, working for the City of Columbus, building roads, bridges, and things like that. When we won the Smart City Challenge, that's when they kind of grabbed me over and they said, "We've got a new role for you here, Bud." So I'm trying to, figure this whole thing out. We've come a long way in the last 3 years. The transportation sector, being the bad actor now, surpassed all other sectors in the greenhouse gas emissions and whatnot. So the city's overall goal for this program, and my portion of the Smart Columbus program, was to basically decrease the metric tons of carbon dioxide caused by light duty vehicles. So the city, once we won this grant, we wanted to lead by example. So we committed early on to replace these ICE vehicles with 200 EVs out of our own fleet over this 3-year time period. And working with major partners such as the Columbus Partnership, American Electric Power, who's the local utility company, our own utility company we have with Division of Power in City of Columbus, Iowa State University, and several others. So, and then I can say this project, wouldn't have been successful at all, of course, without the grant from Paul G. Allen Family Foundation as also a major contributor here. So next slide there, if you don't mind, Matt. Looking at the program in general, we had 5 different priorities that was part of this grant that we needed to cover. The first one there, first and foremost, as Ben mentioned, the grid's getting cleaner. So we had to, give us credibility for our program. And obviously, Central Ohio, when we started, was about 60% coal as far as the grid here is concerned. And so far, we've moved that to less than 50%. It's somewhere in the 40s now. So the grid's getting cleaner. That's making the electric cars more efficient. So we had the goal of 905 megawatts of utility scale renewable energy, along with energy efficiency programs and things like that. Then also the fleet electrification, our goal was 755 Central Ohio region, not just City of Columbus, working with all of our partners, fleet vehicles that we would convert over to EVs. Then the priority 3 is really more or less the US DOT program, where we've got 6 electric autonomous vehicles. This is a shared vehicle. We don't want a bunch of driverless cars going around because that doesn't really give us the bang for our buck that we want. So we want them to be shared also and connected for that matter. And then the 50 electric bikes, that's all in the $40 million US DOT grant. That if you want to know more about that, look at our playbook online. And then also priority 4 was the consumer adoption program, where we started out trying to set our goal. We wanted to see, we were at 0.4% of new vehicles purchased in Central Ohio region in 2015, 2016 timeframe was electric. So what we wanted to do was do a car count, and our goal would be to sell, 3,200 EVs over a 3-year time period. Our grantor wanted to put that in a percentage so we could make better comparisons. So we went with 1.8%. End result is that, we beat that goal by a couple hundred cars. We can talk a whole lot more about that in 2 weeks. So I strongly encourage you to tune into to that webinar in 2 weeks. And then also charging infrastructure. And I think in 4 weeks, we've got one on that. But basically our goal there was 925 new EV chargers at multi-unit dwellings, workplaces, and public, and also, of course, our own fleet. So next slide there, if you don't mind, Matt. You can see our overall goals there that we reached. We ended up with 313 fleet EVs. As far as our consumer adoption program goes, one of our biggest success stories was 12,400 individual test drives of an electric vehicle, which was pretty cool to see all those happen. And then also the regional car dealerships to sell EVs. That was very sparse in Central Ohio a few years ago. And so our goal was to get 33%, or about 1/3 of the dealers, to be electrified dealers. And we surpassed that goal. We got to about 40%. A lot of partnerships developed there. 419 workplace chargers was great. And then also, again, 3,458 EVs purchased over that 3-year time period. So a lot of good success stories in there. Next slide there, Matt, just a little bit on how things happened. Like the Tesla incentives, federal incentives, and things like that created a big part of where we spiked. But basically, the goal was that we would surpass 2% at some point in time in a quarter over this program. And you can see there, late 2018, we went up to 2.34%. And then we went back down a little bit more, and then we drove back up again above that. So right now, Central Ohio is hovering around 2% as far as our goals go. So then next slide, Matt, for the fleet electrification effort, we've had Electrification Coalition, Clean Fuels Ohio, National Renewable Energy Lab. They all were very helpful in determining the best path. And I'll let John King, our fleet manager, a little bit later on here talk about, the details of that. But basically, fleet vehicles, they often travel several miles, so they're going to give us a lot of bang for our buck there on the GHG emission reduction. Next slide, you can see that back to the goal, to get into more specifics, the fleet goal I mentioned was 255 or 265. We made it to 255. We're still looking for those 10 electric buses from our Central Ohio Transit Authority. And then also, as far as the fleet purchases go, that was 450. We were able to have 36 of those. And then the transportation service provider goal was 40, and to date we have 22. So we have a video here that will show you a little bit more details on all that.
Priority 2 within the electrification plan is fleet adoption. And within that priority, we're targeting both private companies and public institutions and governments to encourage them to incorporate electric vehicles into their fleets. As the winner of the Smart City Challenge grant, it's important that we practice what we preach, that we are leading the way in what we're asking other governments and organizations and individuals to do.
I think that the City of Columbus has been committed for some time, and the focus is to always be doing the right thing, looking for ways to reduce our carbon footprint, looking for ways to be more economic. The fuel consumption in 2010 was 3.6 million petroleum gallons of fuel. Last year we consumed 2.45 million gallons of fuel. our fleet hasn't decreased. Our fleet has actually increased by about 1% per annum. Our number of miles increase, our number of work orders increase, the city's continuing to grow, we're growing, our fleet's growing, our petroleum consumption's dropping. The purchasing department wrote our universal term contract in such a way that other municipalities and public entities could use that contract and purchase off of it based on Ohio Revised Code. The beauty of the contract is that any public agency can step into this contract and use it and derive the same benefits that the city of Columbus does.
The city's universal term contract allows entities like Ohio State to partner with them to buy electric vehicles at a lower cost. The Ohio State University has the goal of reducing the carbon footprint of the university fleet by 25% by 2025. In order to do this, EVs are part of that plan. They're really practical for our uses. They can go 100 miles to 200 miles on a charge, and that's perfect for going downtown or around campus.
I work, live, and play in this city as well, and so do my children. My kids live in the area, and I anticipate that someday I'll have grandchildren. So when that time comes, I'd like the environment to be as clean as it possibly could be. And if I can play a role in doing so, I have every intention of doing just that.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Yeah, overall, we did very well, as you can see in this slide here on our public fleet effort. We also, on the private fleet effort, you can see there we had, as far as projected and unrealized, we actually needed to do a lot better there. I think, basically we didn't get too discouraged because we knew that there were a lot of people out there that owned private vehicles that we found that were actually using those for workplace. So in general, because we surpassed the overall goal, we're kind of patting ourselves on the back for all the efforts we did here too. But we'll let Ben get into that a little bit deeper. You can see there on the next slide all of the different agencies besides the city of Columbus. We were in it for 200 vehicles, and then all the other municipalities, the MPO and the airport and city of Dublin, the county actually 19 EVs they purchased, and again, Ohio State University purchased 15 of those vehicles. So a lot of success, a lot of collaboration working together on all that. So next slide there. John, you want to go ahead and take over a little bit more detail on how we did the public fleet with City of Columbus?
Yeah, I sure can. As the next slide on our timeline slide. Yeah, there we go. Great. So from the very beginning, obviously, we had the application process, and we as fleet management were asked how many vehicles we could put in service, which began us looking at our data to figure that out. We come up with our own thoughts and numbers on that, and you can see throughout this time that we worked to do a bid with the purchasing office and an RFP, and finally establishing a universal term contract. And then the first purchase order was issued in January of 2018. And on the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the process of all of each step in that, if you would, or each part of that timeline. Go ahead, Matt. We established this open-end lease contract, which allowed us to purchase at the lowest possible cost while benefiting from a portion of the tax credit. In our contract, we asked for the availability for employee pricing, which also supported the effort overall for electrifying the city of Columbus and the area in general. Our contract was written in a cooperative fashion, which is mentioned in the video by OSU that they use our contract. That cooperative contract allows other agencies to receive Columbus buying power, and so many agencies have used our cooperative contracts. And all these efforts have supported this program that has helped to green our environment. Matt, if you would. Incorporating these EVs into our fleet was obviously challenging. There's a higher upfront cost, and there's often barriers of building that interest. And we used our current purchasing process that we use for all of our vehicles, where we buy a triple net dealer invoice, which is basically cost plus the dealer's markup. We ask for options to be sold at cost, and then we also obviously benefited from the grant participation. By establishing these lease contracts versus the outright purchasing contract, we were able to create competition, which helped keep our procurement costs low. So with all this, talking to people, when you take away their vehicle that has gasoline in it and they're able to fill it up maybe once a week and not worry about things like plugging in and charging vehicles, you have some, what we might think about is range anxiety. Obviously, we have the upfront cost, but the range anxiety is basically, can I get what I need to get done on a single charge? And looking at this and the infrastructure and the data, the drivers had concern that they would be able to complete their daily work on this single charge, and where and when they could recharge if they needed to. And so this range anxiety is partially a function of vehicle capability and partially a driver education issue and a charging infrastructure issue. So to further address these range anxiety issues, we knew we needed to prove to the drivers that EVs could meet their needs. And so through the use of GPS data, one approach was to look at the daily travel distance of each fleet vehicle and to assess if the EV would be compatible. And in coordination with Clean Fuels Ohio and the local auto dealers, we provided EV driving demonstrations, which showcased with Nissan Leaf and Chevy Bolt models. So now we were to the task of selecting the right vehicle, which was a tall order. We looked at the cost, we looked at range, we looked at availability, we looked at functionality. And we found that getting the vehicles in our area itself was even a challenge at times. There were a few that were readily available, but some that we liked were only available on the East Coast, or the West Coast, sorry. And so even after maybe making a selection of a good fleet vehicle, it was unavailable to us. In the end, we made our decisions on the Chevy Bolt, the Nissan Leaf, the Toyota Prius Prime, the Kia Niro, and the Ford Fusion Energy. We had a process that undertook a systematic way. We looked at assessing our existing fleet through our data. We looked at taking all of that data and analyzing it. We secured a contract. We purchased the vehicles and then finally deployed the vehicles. And I can tell you that we maintain about 2,000 light-duty vehicles. And looking at this existing fleet, what we were trying to do is match an electric vehicle with the current job function. And that helped us as we looked at that and looked at the availability. We set our goal for 200 electric vehicles. And we worked with the initial filtering of the eligible vehicles complete. We worked with the Electrification Coalition and used our financial management information system AssetWorks. We used Verizon Network Fleet and GPS data to further evaluate 109 vehicles that could be replaced by EVs during this first phase of the procurement. In addition to the duty cycle and the age criteria, this initial set of vehicles was selected based on the ability to concentrate charging stations in just a few locations. For example, in code enforcement, they have 50 vehicles that park in the same area, so we were able to isolate charging in that one location. And 3 other locations were equipped with 20, 16, and 8 charging stations for a grand total of 94 stations. The Electrification Coalition helped us conduct an initial suitability analysis for 109 vehicles from 6 city divisions. The coalition evaluated drive cycles and assigned an overall EV suitability score. The coalition full suitability analysis revealed most vehicles that were considered for replacement would not need to charge midday, and it performed an analysis on 89 of 109 vehicles upon receiving that data. We did notice that many of our fleet vehicles weren't ready for replacement, so as we put electric vehicles in place of gasoline vehicles, we then developed a program to move those vehicles around and those older vehicles and helped retire some older ones. So we were able to freshen up our fleet in general also. We had to evaluate the bids for this universal term contract, and you can see here on this slide it lays out the pricing and tax credit offerings. We found that in many cases, most cases in fact, the lease option, which allowed us to use part of the federal tax credit, was the best option. In one case, the Ford Fusion Energy, the straight purchase option ended up being the most economical, as the local dealer was able to do better than the lease pricing. And then on the next slide, the vehicle replacements. As we identified this procurement process, we worked to identify how many vehicles we could purchase during that first phase. We used driving demonstrations of the Nissan Leaf and the Chevy Bolt to demonstrate to our drivers that they can meet their needs on a daily basis. We incorporated a demo into this decision-making process, and it was critical to sell these electric vehicles to the agencies. We received approval to acquire our EVs through this universal term contract by City Council in November 2017, and then we completed this purchase order for 93 vehicles in the beginning of 72 Nissan Leafs, 20 Ford Fusion Energies, and 1 Chevy Bolt in January of 18. The vehicles were deployed to multiple agencies throughout the city, and as these EVs were integrated into the fleet, the design and construction group managed the installation of the charging infrastructure. And as Bud already has mentioned, we were able to continue our purchasing process, and we're able to meet that goal of 200 vehicles, and it's been fun to be a part of that. And it's too bad that many aren't being used in 100% capacity on a daily basis with this whole COVID thing, but we know we'll get back on it soon and get to see more use out of them. But that's what I have at this time, Matt.
Yeah, just to pick up there, you know, as we purchased the vehicles in 3 phases, we were trying to coordinate our charging infrastructure at the same time. And the first go around there, the initial project for 86 chargers, all the bids came in. They went from anywhere from just under $500,000 to almost $1 million out of 6 bidders there. So obviously we went with just under $500,000 bid there for the 86 chargers at 3 sites. One site was a brand new city parking garage. 50 chargers went in there, and then again 2 other sites. Since then, we've had 2 other phases of installing charging stations, and so the next 2 phases, I think, was about the same price, about $550,000 for those following 2 phases. So in all, we have 169 chargers now that we've installed for the 200 EVs. You know, about half of our EVs, I think, are maybe a little less than half are you know, plug-in hybrid vehicles. So we were able to use level 1 chargers that we have also. But at any rate, that's where we are now. I work for a public service department. We're the ones that actually install the chargers. We even purchased the chargers with mostly city money on the second 2 phases there. And then after we install them, each department owns them, and then the fleet works through our charge point contract actually to operate them. So a lot of different people, a lot of different players still involved as we go through this whole thing. Somebody else asked a question about grid integration. At one site, public service wanted to experiment with this because we'd had somebody come to us and say, hey, we want to try a V2G, vehicle to grid scenario. And we had a location we thought was perfect for that. So we worked through some planning and things like that. At the end of the day, didn't really work out because the agreement that they proposed said that the money that they saved with this V2G operation would go back to the company that's helping us with this. The only issue was that it's the city's power company, that actually gave us the power, so there wasn't any real money saved. But we're still looking for opportunities in that regard too. So I think maybe I answered a couple of questions there. We can answer more later. At this point, I'll turn it on over to Ben then.
Sorry, I was getting back to the unmute button. So, and as part of the background of this, in the private sector fleet program, I think, and even as Bud was going through everything, it's always interesting. Sometimes we think about the idea of like, let's go from 0 to 100 on transportation electrification and flip a fleet. But the reality is, like, you still have to play into things like capital expenditure costs, right? And how much of a capital budget is available or purchasing budget is available, whether you're a private sector industry or you're the public sector, like the city of Columbus. There's also a lot of things to consider around replacement cycles. So in most cases, it's not like the city or private industry are going to just suddenly get rid of all of their existing and working vehicles. So it does take some time sometimes to work through that process. And so as John was going through and describing some of the operational analysis and the way that stuff was unfolding, sometimes what cities go through, and even with private sector businesses, is the idea of right-sizing fleet. And so looking at what vehicles are being utilized, how do those fit into a profile where like that sort of economics and the transition to EVs are going to be home runs to start, even though we expect most cities and most public sector businesses are going to really make much bigger and more significant fleet electrification commitments. As time goes on, you have to sort of think that and take account of that kind of stuff. So just for background, the private fleet electrification side of things, we basically work to help generate commitments for about 350 EV commitments. There are a lot of challenges along the way, but some of the steps that we took in working with this, and on the right-hand side of this, and you can see that we did sort of a similar analysis with folks where that we did 45 of those with different businesses that exist in Columbus. For those who aren't aware, Columbus is sort of a hidden secret when it comes to the number of Fortune 500 businesses that exist in the greater Columbus region. And also, as you start to think about different companies out there, who has fleets on the ground that are actually operating in the Columbus region, because that was a big part of how the goal was defined. But through the process, we over time worked to engage more than 200 businesses around the idea of helping to expand the knowledge and outreach and education around fleet electrification and why it's something businesses should consider. Next slide. So this is just a quick snapshot of the sort of process that would happen with businesses where, and I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but basically we would work through the process of developing an initial meeting to define some of the expectations around how fleet electrification is going to happen. What are the things that a business needs to consider? We would do EV analysis. The EV analysis ultimately generally led to the idea of helping to develop a commitment. And so for a lot of these businesses, the idea that they were, that they were going to work to electrify their fleet, they were starting from almost, 0 point, right? It wasn't a part of their business plan. It wasn't a part of their operational plan. And for a lot of fleet managers, they're mostly focused on the idea of how do I ensure that we meet the operational needs that our organization has, right? Our business has, or in the case of the city, that the city has to meet those. And so, the idea of going through this process of thinking through a commitment, thinking through this EV analysis was really, I think, a real valuable exercise. And so even if businesses haven't met their commitments today, I think that we've laid the foundation to help them meet the commitment of the future. As we went through that process, go back, Matt, not yet. I would just say that we also worked on thinking through EV, the infrastructure, and we, EVSE, but the site identification. So it's helpful to think about how can you opportunity charge, right? What public infrastructure is available, how much needs to exist in location where those vehicles are going to be parked. Sometimes even what the vehicle options need to be. And then at the end of the day, this helped lead to that process of vehicles being purchased over time. Next slide. And while we're switching, I should mention, if you have questions, keep them coming, keep putting them into the chat box. And at the end of this, we'll do a Q&A and we'll try to answer all those questions. So, that's a great way to throw your questions down. We'll come back to those. The other thing I would just mention is this idea of total cost of ownership. And actually, if you look at this, you'd notice the date is 2017 for this. So it dates back to some of the early stage analysis that existed. But right now, that total cost of ownership modeling or total cost of operation, sometimes people say, would be even better, right? The idea that vehicles are getting cheaper over time. We're seeing battery costs go down. We're seeing the range that vehicles have continues to increase. And so it really just starts to become a way for businesses and city alike, but really businesses to start to think through the idea of not only what is my upfront cost to purchase the vehicle, but then what does that cost over time look like? And if they can, if cities can start to, or private sector businesses can start to realize that, the 3-year mark or a 4-year mark, they're going to start to see a payback or a return on that investment, then that story starts to become a lot more compelling, not only around meeting carbon emission goals or emission reduction goals, or, if their vehicles are operating in highly dense urban communities or, areas where they're more disadvantaged communities that they really need to think about emissions reduction. It's a great opportunity to look at all of those things and also the bottom line of meeting that cost differential and starting to save money over time. Next slide. This is just a quick example of how we help think through, sort of the operational needs. This chart that's up on the right-hand side, we use this as a part of our operational analysis, and we actually now work with Swatch, which is sort of born out of this process. But the idea is that by using telematics and sort of starting to think through where vehicles are parking and how they're operating, then you can actually start to think about what is the access points that they need for infrastructure. And then, in some cases, it's pretty obvious, right? A vehicle parks overnight at a specific location. So that's very easy. And in fact, a lot of times fleets are centralized, but sometimes they're not. And so, it's important to be able to think about where is the best siting location for infrastructure. And so that's a big part of what this helped analyze. Next slide. So a couple of high-level learnings around some of the private fleet electrification efforts is, one is that, because the focus of the program was around the greater Columbus region and hitting goals that were around that, that community, sometimes we found it was challenged to find vehicles that actually operated within the target region. And so, you can sometimes be surprised where people have their vehicles, how they use those vehicles, and how to sort of fit that into the program goals. But that was a little bit of a challenge that came out of the process. The other thing is, and I mentioned it earlier, is, we trying to sort of meet with companies as they're going through their replacement cycle. So if a company on average is replacing their vehicles every 5 years, it's important that we try to figure out how you sequence that so you can do some operational analysis, you can meet with the fleet team or the fleet managers to catch them before they're already making those decisions about replacement vehicles. And that's where we have a point or an opportunity of disruption. And as you can imagine, those things don't always work perfectly, but those are just good lessons learned. As we work with private sector businesses and communities across the country, being able to help them think through, let's have a conversation before you go through that next replacement cycle, and let's figure out which of those vehicles might be best suited for to electrify. That's kind of the idea of sometimes where we ran into challenges for this program. And then one really important value, and this is not a surprise, I'm sure, but there's just incredible value in identifying internal champions. And in some ways, the value of fleet electrification in general is that you build more internal champions every time someone's given the keys and is plugging in. So almost every person, when they drive one of these vehicles, They have incredible acceleration. They are quiet. They're really fun to drive. You get to charge, where you're at instead of having to go to a gas station. In a time of COVID, that can be even better in terms of not being further exposed to, places where COVID might spread. And so I think the idea, though, that you can build internal champions starts to really create the right way and right opportunity to drive the initiative. And so that's just a good lesson learned about how to build these programs within the private sector and private sector fleet transition. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah, this is back to you.
Yeah, apologies for the thanks. Apologies for the small chart here, but this is taken from our report, and it's going to be located on the Playbook website. So if you just Google Smart Columbus Playbook, there's a wealth of information in there. But just over time, from our grant, basically we were offering $3,000 per vehicle offered to taxis first, and then we brought TNCs such as Uber and Lyft into that later on. And overall, the Columbus Yellow Cab ended up purchasing 20 vehicles under that program. We were only able to get 2 Uber drivers to buy into this thing, but at this point, we've got 22 out of the 40. The hope is now that we're working through 2 companies, again, Columbus Yellow Cab, and then also a company called Green Spot, who is a charging company that contracts with car share companies for EVs. So we're working with them right now to deploy chargers in the public right-of-way. That's pretty much the city's business model. We don't really want to own too many chargers ourselves, but we're trying to clear the path policy-wise and things like that for people to be able to put chargers in the right-of-way by making standards and things like that available to them. So the real issue that we ran into here was that the charging infrastructure just wasn't in place. We put the grant funds out there, but it always came down to range anxiety. So now that finally the Volkswagen settlement funds are available, and then now the PUCO is allowing AEP to put a lot of fast chargers out there to the people that are buying into that program. That's all starting to turn now, and we think we're going to be a lot more successful in that area. Next slide there, Matt, if you will. So Columbus Yellow Cab, I mentioned them. They're a great story. The owner, Morgan Kaufman, he inherited the company actually from his grandfather. The company's about 90 years old. He calls it his 90-year-old startup. His goal is to convert the whole fleet actually over to EVs, all 200 of his cars. So he's working now, like I said, with us to get charging and to get electric cars deployed around the city, not just the chargers. His goal is to actually provide more jobs to people in disadvantaged neighborhoods. He's looking at properties at this point, trying to deploy chargers there, leave a car there, and then just go to a couple of day training, and then you can actually be a driver. You can go and check this car out and go about your way in the neighborhood. That really eliminates a lot of STEM miles. That's his biggest headache. He originally, about 5 years ago, wanted to try out an electric car, but the time it took him to go get a DC fast charge, 10 miles away and then come back and go to the area of town that he wanted to serve, it just didn't work. So, basically, this whole program, I think in our case, as we collect the data and then we put it out there on our operating system for universities and businesses and other companies to kind of look at, we're hoping that this will be helpful to not just our own city, the way things are growing, but other cities as well. But again, this story here with Columbus Yellow Cab and Green Spot and those, that's just now starting to take effect. So Matt, turn it back over to you again.
Just to flag, I think the other thing is that when we started the program, a lot of it was really focused on light duty because that was where the vehicles that were available and were an option. Battery electric buses were really starting to just kind of enter into the system. But this really, charts the idea that like thinking about both public sector and private sector fleet transition, that there's really a huge growth opportunity in all sectors. And, in some ways, it's not whether if transportation electrification is the future, it's more a question of when. And I think in many ways, the benefit of what's happened in Columbus, both from a private sector and a public sector standpoint, is, it really sets the table for that future of transportation electrification that's coming. And I think the more that communities, cities, private sector businesses are starting to pick up on some of the lessons learned in Columbus and the accelerate efforts that they're sharing, the more that we can start to build all cities across the country, build for this future that's coming. But there's going to be a ton of new models that are coming out. All the way from one of the best-selling vehicles on the market right now, the Ford F-150, where the plant in Dearborn, Michigan makes a Ford F-150 every 43 seconds or something like that. The idea that we can electrify that, there's almost 900,000 that are sold on an annual basis, and it's one of the most popular vehicles that exists in city fleets. There's also a lot of others that are coming that are going to help really create a lot of market transition. So you might have even looked at the vehicle options that were shared earlier. Most of those were more sedan style, and the idea that we're in this next future of bigger vehicle formats that meet SUVs, meet trucks, meet box trucks, meet all the way up to the Class 8 semi. It's a pretty exciting stage for electrification, and I think places like Columbus are going to show what the future can look like faster than some others. I'll also mention just one other thing on fleet electrification is that we're still just, even, and Bud talked about it briefly, but we're just starting to scratch the surface on things like vehicle to grid application, and the idea that an EV in a fleet format is actually really perfectly suited to think about grid balancing. And so as communities are facing challenges around how do they make peak demand, right? When there's a ton of need for electricity, the idea that maybe these fleet vehicles can actually be bidirectional and actually provide that balancing instead of having to build new electric generation facilities is a pretty exciting moment. And then also even just on a building basis, if vehicles can actually help keep those buildings from hitting peak pricing in a lot of communities, that's another exciting place that we're going to start to see coming out. Next slide. And then, this is sort of I've probably said this like 5 times, but never enough. This is new technology still. And really, in many ways, we've just started to scratch the surface around both the viability of the technology, but also the application. And we're seeing battery costs go down faster than anyone ever predicted. We're seeing the density and the power that those battery packs can contain. It's just starting to become smaller and smaller packages, right? So that means also they're lighter weight. So it means vehicles can go further on a smaller number of batteries, and we can get more efficiency out of these vehicles. But then we're also seeing charging rates increase. So, if you plug in a vehicle, and Bud was starting to talk about this, and it might have been, and people haven't seen the movie Mr. Mom, I start to feel like that, the 220, 221, whatever it takes kind of statement. But, it would be that we could get, you would charge a vehicle in 4 or 5 hours on level 2 charging. And now we're getting to the place where some of the DC fast chargers are going to be 350 or 400 kilowatts and can charge a vehicle in 10 to 15 minutes. Those are game-changing moments, but that stuff is happening and is really becoming a part of the available technology, not the technology of the future. So if anything, EVs are only going to get better. So they're going to get cleaner. They're powered by domestic resources. They are providing better economic and national security, but they're also going to charge faster and be cheaper. Next slide. So now I think we're at the Q&A.
I think those are the slides we have prepared today. As mentioned, feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A. We will take as many as we can in the next 7 minutes or so. So we'll start off with a question from Tammy, and Bud, I'm going to lob this over to you. Can you share more information on your policy changes and other work that you did to allow third-party charging in city rights-of-way? And I will plug our third webinar in the cities where we will talk more about charging, but I'll talk over to you.
Yeah, a whole lot more on that in a few weeks when we do that public charging. But at this point, like I said, we're working with GreenSpot, who is a car sharing company, and basically put together a several-page agreement with them that basically talks about what it will look like out there, what the cost will be for parking, what the cost will be for charging, because we definitely want to have a stake in that. But we started out by having just a pilot where we used some of the grant dollars to build 2 DC fast chargers out there, all we wanted to see was 50 kilowatt chargers, and we kind of dovetailed that into an existing Ohio DOT project. So it worked really well. The road was already opened up and things like that. So the biggest thing is that, you know, we don't want to have a lot of chargers out there in the right of way. This is one of our public service director's concern. And then the company goes out of business, and then we're kind of left holding the bag with this here. Maybe it, you know, doesn't operate correctly, and things like that. So what we've devised is basically a pull box out there where, you know, it's got conduit in the roadway, conduit in the sidewalk. Basically, if you want to put a charger in, you just kind of plug and play, so to speak. So we think that our standard for that is going to be very important for us to minimize costs. The thing that really is our biggest concern, we haven't answered that for our division of power yet, is the demand charge issue, and trying to center a policy around that about DC fast chargers. At this point, it's not a good business model at all for division of power because of the way city code's set up. So that's one thing that we want to tackle. Fortunate for us at this time, you know, the lion's share of the power out there is supplied by our utility AP, and they have a way to mitigate the demand charges through a tariff. So again, there's a whole lot on that. We'll cover it in detail here in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Bud, so much. Next question, I'm going to toss over to you, John. Is Columbus looking to purchase more electric vehicles, specifically light and medium duty vans and trucks this year? Do you have funding to pursue those?
So we purchase new vehicles every year, and interesting enough with this question is I was looking today at questions that came in for a bucket truck bid that we're doing. And we're doing a different scenario of bucket trucks where the bid is for gas, or diesel, CNG, and then we are putting electric vehicles on there as well. And through that bid process, we were even asked, are we interested in an all-electric bucket truck? So obviously we said yes to that. So in answering the question as to, yes, we're always looking to green the fleet and to purchase hybrid or electric vehicles, CNG vehicles. We want to be as green as possible. It's interesting as technology changes to offer this more medium and heavy duty truck. We're very interested in these F-150s. I know throughout the city, as we purchase so many of those trucks, that once they become available, those will be an option on our Ford contract that we have now. So we're excited about that. And you know, one thing I'll say is that we know that there's other things in works as far as electric things, but we as the City of Columbus fleet, we don't want to necessarily be the pioneer with something that's not a tested OEM product, so we like to wait just a little bit. But I wouldn't say that we're afraid to jump in there and try it if we know that it's something, again, as Bud mentioned, we don't want to do something where a company might be out of business and then we're stuck with the product. So we're a little selective, but we believe in these OEM products. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. All right, a question from Rick. He says, how do you respond to the concern that EV efforts are a subsidy for higher income consumers? Ben, you want to tackle that one?
Sure.
Yeah,
I mean, I think.
Oh, Ben, okay.
Yep.
Go ahead, Ben. I thought you said Bud.
No problem. You're free to answer it, Bud. So take
no, go ahead.
If you want. But I think in general, people who vehicle purchasing is largely done by households that have higher incomes, right? But there are a lot of things that are out there that are focused around trying to reduce those upfront capital costs. And I think that the challenge you have a little bit is like there's no existing stock in the system, right? So part of that is like if we're trying to think about how do we feed the system and create a system that's going to support all communities and diversity and equity and inclusion, a big part of that is we have to figure out how you drive down those costs, right? And so to some degree, those early stage subsidies and early stage engagement do that, right? They start to build out the manufacturing chain. So then costs go down, right? So then that means access for everybody. The other part is that as more vehicle stock comes in, right? So I buy one, everybody, other people buy one, the city uses them, those become part of the used vehicle stock. Those become much more affordable vehicles for low income, people of lower income who maybe can't afford a new vehicle. So I think that there's incredible value and long-term impact around the idea that these vehicles are being put into the system and then ultimately are going to be a much better option for, for people of lower income. I will lastly say, EVs have almost no maintenance. And so that's also the benefit is as these vehicles become used and become part of that rolling stock, these are going to be great vehicles for people who are going to, as they purchase them, are going to have way lower costs over time. And I think that that's going to be a huge benefit for everyone. I tried to do that as quickly as I could.
That was perfect. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Bud. Thank you, John, for sharing your perspectives today. If we did not get to you in the live Q&A, we'll shoot you a quick chat from our team. Wanted to invite you to the next webinar in this series 2 weeks from today. We will be talking about consumer adoption and how we pursued the goal of going from 0.37% consumer adoption in Central Ohio to a goal of 1.8%, and the ways we scaled consumer adoption in a non-ZEV state in Ohio. So invite you to join us for the next webinar, invite you to check out accelerateyourcity.com where you can learn more about our program. In particular, you can download documents like the Universal Term Contract that John talked about. There's a lot of rich content in there about our best practices and even documents that you can leverage. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and we hope to see you in the next webinar in 2 weeks.